Welcome to the Life's Best Medicine podcast, where we are finding hope and healing one episode at a time. No appointment needed, no rubber gloves, and no copay. Just a healthy dose of life lessons to help equip you for this wild journey we call life. Hey everyone, this is a friendly reminder that we are here for entertainment purposes only. We may not even be that entertaining at times, but this is not medical advice. Talk to your doctor, check with your healthcare professionals before making any lifestyle changes or medicine changes. What we're talking about is our clinical experience and what we've seen. And so if you really want our advice, you can consult us. You can actually consult me as a doctor, or you can consult my guest and get all your questions answered. But we can't give free medical advice because we can't pay our bills with that, but we can help to educate you a bit and allow you to think a little bit. And always reach out to your medical professional before making any lifestyle changes. Thank you. Again, I want to thank my sponsors, Keto Mojo, keto-mojo.com. Great website, great people. They're doing great work in the community. They're doing a ton with education. So if you're looking for a ketone monitor or glucose monitor, they're a great resource. And check out their website. It's amazing. They have so much information, so much good stuff for us to all learn from. Also, of course, health code, gethealth.com, GETHLTH.com. Discount code MetHealth through this podcast and for metabolic health. They still have great chocolate and vanilla shakes and vegetarian offerings for those so inclined. But they're doing great work, and they also have a new berberine that a lot of people are raving about that has turmeric in it. So it's right up, what we're looking for our patients for improving metabolic health. So again, thank you for your sponsorship and for bringing these episodes, and thank you for listening. Hello and welcome back to the Life's Best Medicine podcast. My guest here today, I'm like blown away. I just read his book, really thoroughly enjoyed it. It was like different than what I thought it would be. It's called, I'll hold it up for you guys can see it if you're on YouTube, The Fat Ginger Nerd. And I was like, what is that about? But it's Brendan Reid. I loved it, read it. It was like, had a lot of great information, a lot of great, the mental part of it, like, childhood and all that stuff. So I'm not going to tell your story. Brendan, awesome. I'm glad we interacted right before COVID, right when that started. And then obviously things have been crazy and we got to reconnect here in San Diego. So Brendan, welcome, man.
Right, it's great to meet and to catch up and reconnect. Like you say, we met for the first time 2020 at a conference in Denver, and like you say, the world was just on the verge of shutting down at that time, and we're sort of living almost on a day-to-day basis. What were the rules today? What were the rules tomorrow, etc. So much has changed obviously since then, and like you say, we caught up again recently in San Diego here in 2024, and those I haven't actually been to the US at all sort of between times, so it was great to sort of meet you on both of the occasions that I happened to be over there. It's quite a big trip for someone like myself coming from New Zealand. This is a New Zealand accent for those not familiar. But yeah, it's great to catch up and be with you again.
And Brendan has a history of being a DJ, so he's gonna outclass me here. He's got the voice, he's got the look, he's got it all going on. But that wasn't always the case, right? Hence the book.
No, it wasn't.
So your book was amazing, man. We were just talking about it a little bit before we started recording, and I would tell you, like, I think it's available on Amazon, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so go grab it. I mean, he gave me a copy. I was one of the lucky ones to get a signed copy from him, and I'm telling you, I had like 2 talks going on, and I was really busy. And I'm like, okay, I'll just read for a few minutes before I go to bed. I'm like, an hour later, hour and a half later, I'm like still reading. Okay, what's gonna happen next? But you do it's really, the way it's written is so great, and you bring out the flavor. And maybe it's because I grew up at the same time and I had the same kind of struggles, but it really spoke to me. And so tell people who don't know you the beginning of the story, how it started out, and your journey.
Sure. Well, I guess the main point of difference I like to begin with when telling my story is that a lot of other stories we hear about people when they lose the weight, it tends to be accumulated during their adulthood. You hear about this this concept of middle age spread, as it were, like you grow up and then you grow out. and they're kind of at two separate stages in life. And I guess for me, my key point of difference with my story is that I was growing out for as long as I could remember, going right back to early childhood. I have no memory of being characterized as anything other than fat, going all the way back to the primary school days. It's interesting when I look at photos of myself in those earliest days. I don't think I actually look too bad, maybe a little on the chubby side or whatever, but nothing too crazy, right? But it was
Yeah.
still enough. It was still enough for others to notice. And it's when it's at the point once it gets noticeable enough that others start pointing it out to you, and the ways in which people will point that out to you become increasingly unkind, shall we say, and it just starts to become this downward spiral, mentally at least, in terms of, well, okay, everybody's telling me I've got this problem, I better go do something about it. But the issue I had at the time, and obviously I didn't want to be the way I was. I wanted to be better. I wanted to be healthier. The advice that I was getting right from the start was consistent across the board, from your doctors and your professors and your medical experts, all the way through to other kids on the playground. Like, the knowledge was just that ubiquitous and consistent across the board. All anybody ever needs to do to lose weight is to eat less and to move more. It's all about the energy balance, and fat has the most calories, so that's where we want to focus. It needs to be a low fat diet. I remember learning in primary school for myself the differences between saturated and unsaturated fat, and hearing that saturated fat was the worst, which meant that I needed to be eating margarine instead of butter, and all of those little things. From such a young age, it was tough at times. It was tough.
And you were doing these things. You walked a lot, you tried to move more, and you tried changing your diet. You did so many things. And that's the tragic thing is so many people think, well, if you're overweight, then you're lazy and you're dumb basically, and you don't know what to do. You're not listening to everyone else. And especially if the rest of your family's thin, right? It sounds like you were the outlier in your family too, right?
They're all different shapes and sizes. Some of us are bigger, smaller, taller, shorter, wider, thinner than others. We're a mixed bag. But like you say, I'm certainly at the rounder end of the scale. But at a societal level, sort of beyond the family, I was that much more of an outlier in those days. Growing up in the 80s, when I was at primary school, for example, there weren't so many big kids around in those days as there are perhaps now, and that meant, in a sense, that I was the subject of that much more attention back then. I was that much more of an outlier at that sort of community level. And the advice, like I say, was just so consistent throughout. It all sort of culminated, I remember, by the age of 12. I'm at intermediate school by this time, and there was a dietary intervention, you might say, that was carried out. And I don't know whose idea it was. It wasn't mine, but at the same time, I'm thinking, let's go along with this, right? I don't want to be the way I am. Let's talk to a registered dietitian, an expert on the subject. And that's when I was introduced to the food pyramid for the first time, and more about low fat and load up on the fruits, vegetables, and grains. And of course, what's a kid going to do? But to want to do as you're told. You're taught to respect your elders, respect your betters, listen to the experts, do as you're told, elbows off the table, all those things. And when you do your honest best to follow that advice that is just so clear and consistent across the board, and it doesn't work, well, the natural conclusion on the part of everybody around you is, well, there's clearly something wrong with you. If you're fat, then it's your fault. And when you hear that from so many people for a sufficiently long a period, in my case, years, sort of approaching decades, as I grow into adulthood, you can't help but start to absorb some of it sooner or later. You start to believe it and accept it, that you are, or I am, this fat failure of a human being, and this is just the way I'm going to be for the rest of my life, and that there's nothing I can ever do about it.
Yeah, and you explained that really well as going to see the dietitian and follow up, and you gained weight, and they all look at you disappointed, like you're not they think you're lying to them, that you're cheating all the time, and you're like, I'm not, I'm doing what you're telling me to do. And I know as a doctor, the first part of my career, I would look at people and go, you clearly aren't listening. Yeah, I'm giving you the ADA's recommended diet, and your sugars keep going up every time you come in, right? And we didn't have CGMs as a lie detector test back then. Now we have those, right?
Mm.
But back then, everyone when they think you're not exercising, you're not doing, you're like, look, I'm walking, I'm doing everything that you told me to do.
Yeah. It even went a step further with the dietitian, and I'm not sure how much of this I wrote about in the book, but there was one point in the discussion where I sort of began to say to the dietitian, "Look, where are you getting your information from? Like, is there any sort of extra
Yeah.
reading material, if you like, that I can take home with me? Because I had a bit of a brain. I could read and write and add and subtract. I just physically was worse than useless. So she gave me a copy of a brand new report that had just been published by what was then known as the Department of Health here in New Zealand, the Ministry of Health these days, called Food for Health. And okay, so I'm taking home this government published report that explains, what people need to do on a healthy diet, and it's saying all these things about how obesity is the result of excess energy consumption or a shortfall in expenditure. I don't have it in front of me. I'm just sort of paraphrasing here. And for children in particular with progressive obesity, the solution is to eat less and to move more. So it was she's an expert in her own right, this dietitian, and she's also getting her information from the government itself. So there's just, in my mind, as a youngster, there is no way that any of these people could possibly be wrong. So of course I'm going to commit. Of course I'm not happy the way I am. Of course I'm going to give it my sincere best. And then for people to turn around and say, well, clearly you're lying or you're cheating or you're lazy or you're stupid or whatever. It was a tough time. And it was sort of at that point after that experience that I decided, okay, well, if the best official advice is not going to work for me, then nothing is ever going to work for me. If the very best people can't help me, then I cannot be helped. And like I said before, it's just a case of, okay, well, let's just learn to live within what would over time become increasingly limited means, just to make the best of what life I expected would lie ahead of me. I didn't expect it would be necessarily a happy one. I certainly didn't expect it would be a long one. But just to exist however I could, the best I could, and just living with those circumstances that at that time just seemed so hopelessly out of control.
Yeah, and you talked about a lot of things, but one things I like is that you were walking and exercising. And one of the I underlined a lot of stuff in the book, but I like this quote. You said the only thing worse than physical struggle was being seen by others while you're physically struggling, right? So you'd want to exercise early in the morning before anyone's up, late at night, because when you're that heavy person, everyone judges you, right? And when you're sweaty and tired and beat up, but you kept driving through that. You kept exercising still.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, growing up, I'd had no shortage of exposure to all the taunts and the teasing and the bullying and so on. Not so much physical. It was mostly words, but the words are enough. You get enough of them, and like I say, they start to sink in. And so when you're doing your best to try and get better, however you can, walking to work and back and so on, that was not an easy thing at my size at that time. I'm approaching. I have to convert metric and imperial here because we're metric in New Zealand. At my heaviest, I'm about 300 pounds, there or thereabouts. Um, and so I made this commitment to start walking to work and back. And it was about a mile and a half, I suppose, in each direction. And it would take me about 45 minutes, and I would be absolutely done at the end of each way. Like I would need another 45 minutes just to recover um, afterwards. So it was a real hard slog, even just walking. But then again, when you're at that size, people often wonder, why don't fat people exercise? Well, I can tell you why. The answer is it's just too hard. And if you don't believe me, then feel free to strap on an 80, 100-pound fat suit and just try living just all your basic everyday tasks day to day. You'll see how hard it is, and it won't take long before you decide, well, this isn't much fun. I guess I'm not going to do much of it either. So it was a real slog
Well, bless you. Bless
just to
you
do
even
the
talked
basics
about
like the walking.
And you talked about stuff that I got identified when your legs are so big they rub together and you wear it your pants and you get rashes and it's not easy. And then your shoes, your ankles hurt, everything's beat up, and then you get to work and you're sweaty, and then you put a bunch of fans on. You talked that story too, and then people made fun of you saying you're hot right? Because you're trying to cool down on a hot, humid day.
Yeah, yeah. The office at that time wasn't the best for air conditioning, so I just sort of had to bring in my own. And when you're someone of that size, it doesn't take much for you to overheat and get a bit sweaty, as you say. And so I had this set of fans arrayed around me, and a colleague of mine. I remember the day he took the photo. It's since become quite a famous photo of mine. There aren't very many of them, but this is one that I shared. He goes, Brendan, and I'm just sort of focusing on my work at the time at my computer, and he's like, Brendan. And finally, I sort of finished what I'm doing. I'm sort of turn around to my over my left shoulder. What? And he just sort of takes that photo of me, just looking at him, surrounded by all these fans. And like I say, the email goes around, and it wasn't meant unkindly, but for me, it was one of those rare occasions where I had been photographed, and I was just so self conscious that, in a sense, I perhaps wasn't even aware of just how bad I really looked because I had just sought to avoid being photographed all the time. And so that goes around the office. And of course, that's all a bit embarrassing, but it actually serves as one of my key before photos, if you like, at this point, because what nobody else knew at the time, not my colleague or anybody else who took that photo, was the very week that photo was taken, I just committed to trying a low carb diet. For the first time. But at that time, it was still a tremendous secret. I'm so down and out about the prospects. The last thing I wanted to do was socialize the fact that I was about to get underway with something, because it would just be a case of everybody sort of thinking, oh, here we go. He's trying again, with no expectation that it would amount to anything. So that was my big secret at the time. But I'm glad it was actually taken now, obviously on reflection, because it's the perfect before photo, if you like. I look awful, absolutely awful.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things is you had the right mindset. I was looking because mindsets become like a big thing, and that's what I've been looking at a lot. It's the mindset, and you quoted here, and I underlined this too. You said even if taking things at my own pace meant that it would take me years to get where I wanted to be, that would still be better than going on too fast and burning out, right? Because so
Yeah.
many of us do that. We go, okay, that's it. I'm not gonna eat anything. I'm gonna work out every day, and then you're like, oh, my knee hurts, my back hurts, and everything hurts, and you just give up.
Yeah, you go cold turkey. Have the big sort of clear out of the house, the fridge and the pantry and all that sort of thing. And I didn't do any of that. I took things nice and gradually. I was always conscious of not pushing myself too hard. I guess again, in particular, because certainly when it came to exercise in the past, everything was too hard. So in order for me to not burn myself out, as you say, I recognized that I needed to take it nice and slow. Obviously, progress it as much as I can, but to not burn myself out along the way. And in the end, the journey, the weight loss period, if you like, of active weight loss lasted for me about 15 months. It was about October 2015 when I began, and I reached goal literally New Year's Eve, December 2016.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I mean, you were losing a kilogram a week pretty much. I mean, that's pretty like that's no one would like you if they saw that you lost weight at that rate, but you had a long way to go. But a lot of people, it's a plateau, it's a struggle. And you talk about that. You talk about, some of the plateaus you had after eating ice cream one time, or I'm sorry, pizza. And and it slowed you down. You go, okay, it's not worth it. And then you kind of made these judgments in your mind of what was working and what wasn't working.
Yeah, it was very much an experiment in my part. Like my career, perhaps unsurprisingly, is in IT historically. So it's sedentary and it's not very social. So I'm well used to sort of just being by myself and figuring out these sort of problems in a logical, methodical way. So I'm putting this IT brain to work with this idea of this low carb diet, and I'm thinking, well, what is a low carb diet? So I took it very, very literally, and I decided, well, it's all in the name, right? Just eat anything that is sufficiently low in carbs. So it began for me as a sort of an experiment, if you like. And so I went supermarket shopping, and it took me half a day. And I'm looking at the food labels on like everything. I'm picking a number of carbs according to these labels, and everything that was above my cutoff point stayed on the shelf. Everything that was below the cutoff point, I took home with me. And so I come home with this smorgasbord of foods and products and things, half of which I'd never consumed before. And a lot of them would require a bit of meal prep, a bit of cooking. So there was a lot of learning to do along that particular angle of things as well. But yeah, like I say, it was very much an experiment, just starting off. All right, well, if it's all in the name, if low carb is just simply about, getting rid of the carbs from the diet, let's just try anything that is low enough in carbs, see what works, see what doesn't, just monitor things and make the tweaks and adjustments along the way.
Yeah, let's take one step back. So how did you get introduced to low carb?
Yeah. So first my very first introduction to low carb, I guess, actually goes back quite some time. So I recall not long after I moved out of home. This would be early 2000s, I suppose. And this comes around every sort of few years, right? It was the Atkins diet was a thing in the media. This was about 20 or so years ago. And it was sort of going through its occasional cycle of publicity, as it has for a while now. But this was the first time I'd really sort of been exposed to it. And, it was sold as this idea of, eat bacon and eggs and lose weight, eat steak and butter and lose weight, which, on one hand sounded incredibly appealing. But at the same time, whenever it sort of came out of the woodwork, if you like, it was always drowned out and sort of stomped into the ground by the usual gaggle of experts saying, no, 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 there's no evidence that works. Don't you know saturated fat will clog your arteries and you'll be dead of a heart attack before you know it. Whatever you do to lose weight, do not do low carb. And so here's me as an impressionable, wanting to be responsible young adult thinking, okay, well, these are what the experts are saying, so that's what I'm going to avoid. So that was the first time I'd actually heard of low carb. And that decision at that time probably cost me about 15 or so years of quality of life. It wasn't until 2015 when I'd been walking for a while at this point and I'd lost a little bit of weight, just a couple of pounds, a few pounds, a couple of kilos, thinking, well, okay, this is better than nothing, but I'm still visibly a monster, right? Like nobody's ever going to be able to tell the difference. Let's get some professional help in this exercise department. Let's make an appointment at a gym, which in itself for me was just like walking into the lion's den, given my history with exercise. It had never really gone well for me. And to my surprise, the gym manager there, he took one look at me and he said, mate, there's not much I can do for you here. I mean, I could sign you up. You might lose a few kgs along the way, but I don't think you're going to sustain it. We need to look more about what you're eating. And my immediate instinct was to think, oh, here we go, another eat less, move more guy. But he put me onto this website, which appeared to be promoting something along the lines of a low carb diet. This website, the Real Meal Revolution, it was called. And I look at it, and I sort of my mind is flashing back to these media stories from years ago. And I'm thinking, this looked like Atkins, right? Wasn't that discredited years ago? And he came back to me with a really good argument that I just could not refute. Um, he said, "Look, mate, this is my livelihood. You're far from the first person like yourself who has come through my doors, and I wouldn't be in the position that I'm in if I didn't have some idea about how to help people like you. And in my professional opinion, I've seen it for myself. In my experience, I think this diet will be worth it for you." And so this was the first time that I'd had someone suggest to me face to face that low carb could actually be a valid option. But it was so confronting in my mind. I couldn't rationalize it. I couldn't reconcile it. I was sort of thinking somebody somewhere here is wrong, right? Because if this guy is right about low carb, then that means a generation of experts before him are all wrong. And in my mind, that's just impossible, right? So the sheer weight of probability was so stacked against this guy, but he seemed so certain, and I couldn't refute his argument. If he's seeing these results for himself, and he's not even an expert on diet, he's a gym manager, but he sees the results just by putting people on low carb anyway. Um, that I thought, right, well, the only way I'm going to prove this guy wrong, because I was so certain that he had to be, the only way I'm going to prove this guy wrong is if I try it. So the idea of actually giving low carb a shot was made with no faith, no belief whatsoever that it would actually work. It was more about showing this other guy out and exposing him for the fraud that I was so convinced that he had to be. And it turned out, obviously, over the weeks and months that followed, that if anybody was wrong, it was me. I was the one who was wrong about low carb all along, and I could not have been more surprised, and I certainly couldn't have been any happier for that realization.
Yeah, and that he could have just taken the money and just said, okay, yeah, here you go, right? But he cared enough to say, hey, look, I'm not just going to take your money if I can't help you. And I think, that's I was like, wow, and I mean, that's a good approach and a nice way of saying, try this, look at it. And it happened to be this nutty professor, Tim Noakes, right, who's changed all of medicine. That's his, that's his work.
That's right. Yeah, for me, I still had this weight of expectation in the back of my mind that all of these other experts have to be right about low carb, that it can't possibly work, and I really needed someone in that sort of academic space, if you like, who was be prepared to speak up and say, well, actually, this could be a thing, and here's some evidence that supports my position. And it was Prof Noakes who was the one to step up in my sort of early learning experience,
Yeah, and
and it
and
was
and the irony is that he wrote the lore of running, and he said you have to carb load, you have to carb, he pushed carb load. Then he realized, oh, I'm getting older, I'm getting diabetes, I gained weight. His dad died of diabetes complications. He changed what he was doing, and he got better. So then he writes this and helps you. So it's pretty
that's
amazing
right.
how it all goes around, And now you're writing this book to help other people.
Yeah, the reason for writing the book, I guess, at first was it was a very organic process. Like there wasn't any sort of expectation while losing the weight that anything would really come of it beyond just the satisfaction of the weight loss itself. But obviously, as it's all coming off, and I seem to be, on a bit of a roll with this whole low carb weight loss experience. So much in the way of thoughts and ideas and emotions are just sort of bubbling to the surface, right? A lot of long suppressed stuff from childhood and that sort of thing, and just felt this irrepressible need to just get a lot of things off my chest. And I've only got so many friends and family who can only listen for so long, and I realized eventually that what I think I need here is I need an audience that is going to be able to understand and relate to everything that I feel I need to say, and B, will never ever get tired of me saying it. And I realized that at that point that the only person in the world that I could guarantee would meet both of those criteria was me. And so I start having conversations in effect with myself when I start keeping a journal. It
Yeah,
was
that was
about
key. I love that you kept a journal and go, here's how I was at this point when I was, you know, 20 pounds, whatever kilograms down. And so your mindset and your approach and how things changed. And yeah, it's pretty amazing. And the other thing, I just wanted to step back a little bit, like tell people about the yellow polo shirt, the yellow shirt that you wore. And because I think that's I was like waiting for that to come back into the story. I don't want to give the whole
yeah.
story away, so I won't tell it all, but I think that's a huge thing because so many times we think of that we're the worst, and then you look back and go, man, I was pretty good back then. you
Yeah,
know?
there's a few sort of recurring themes and props and motifs, if you like, that I sort of sprinkle in throughout the story, and the bright yellow polo shirt is one of them. So the bright yellow polo shirt began as part of the uniform for one of the radio stations that I used to work at. I was an announcer for sort of 8, 9, 10 years after I left school, and at one of these stations I worked at, the uniform was this horrible bright yellow polo shirt. And at the time, it was about 2 sizes too small for me. So I hated going out and about and being seen in that of all things. Where possible, I would prefer to be the one in the studio pushing the buttons where nobody can see me, etc. But it was always hopelessly too small, and I thought it looked hideous anyway. Um, but I kept it just as a sentimental thing, I suppose, as a memento of my time having worked there back in the day. And so it stayed in the wardrobe for years and years and years, along with so many other things that were, becoming increasingly too small for me. And when the time came that I was actually starting to lose some of that weight, it was a really interesting thing that started to happen. I started to be able to almost work my way backwards through the wardrobe, and it was almost in a sense like a trip back in time, because I'm working my way back towards clothes I hadn't worn for an increasingly long period of time, and lurking right back at the small end of the wardrobe was this bright yellow polo shirt. And I'd never been able to fit it properly in the first place, back in the sort of mid 90s, I suppose, when it was first issued to me. But eventually, sort of towards the end of the journey, I was finally able to fit it properly for the first time in my life. And it was when I went back to the gym, because in the end, I never got a membership at the gym. I went back about 9 or 10 months later, and at that time, I was able to finally fit this bright yellow polo shirt for the first time. And since then, I think I've actually gotten a little bit smaller. Even I'm not even sure, but I still have it, and I could still wear it if I wanted to today. But it was such a long journey in life, going from what the mid 1990s through to the mid 2010s. That's what 20 years before I was finally able to fit this piece of clothing that had been given to me that much earlier.
Yeah, it's just that remarkable, like you're saying, like you're used to putting clothes away, you can't fit in them anymore, and like so many of us can identify with that. So many people reading it will identify. You get to that hopeless stage, and those you thought you were bad back then, and it got worse and worse and worse. Now it's like a country song backwards. You get your house back and your wife back, and all these. When you start losing weight, and it's almost like and yeah, you bring the emotion to it really well. It's like, okay, let's see how long this is gonna last. How it's nervous because you don't want to go back to where you started from.
Yeah, the question of maintenance was always another one to sort of think about towards the end. But certainly for as long as I was actively losing weight, I was never really concerned with the maintenance at all. I was just sort of figuring out at
You
that
want to
time
get
what
there
was working.
first. Yeah, then
Yeah,
I'll
let's
worry
get
about
there
it.
first. Let's get there first. One thing at a time, and worry about it later. Even just the journey of getting to whatever goal itself was. Mentally a bit of a struggle because, like I was saying earlier, I'd been overweight for my whole life. So I really had no idea about what I was actually capable of becoming physically. So it was really, really hard for me to actually set these goals in terms of, well, how much could I end up weighing? How much would I like to weigh? To think that I might have a say in the matter at all was just so bewildering to me. Um, and so goal setting throughout the weight loss journey was quite difficult. Um, but I sort of set baby steps along the way. I remember one of my first weight loss goals was get to my high school weight. Like everybody sort of talks about, oh, I'd love to get back to what I weighed when I was at high school. Whatever. Well, when I was at high school, I weighed 120 kilograms at age 17. I don't know what that is in pounds. It's probably 250 plus.
Yeah, 240,
Um,
250. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So for me to say that, well, I'm back at my high school weight, it's actually not much of a big deal when that was what it was for me. But just every few months you sort of revise the goals. Okay, well, the weight still seems to be coming off reasonably steadily at sort of 9, 10 pounds a month or a kilo a week for about 8 months. Before things sort of finally started to level off. And at that point, I could sort of start to project where I might potentially possibly end up as at a sort of new goal weight. And the goal I ultimately set for myself was to get down to 82 kilograms from 132, so the 50 kg difference,
Yeah, it's
which is
huge.
about 110 pounds.
Yeah, that's
Um,
huge. Yeah, and you
and
even
so
said that, the one thing you said here, I was like, just going back to the clothes thing for a second, it says, no longer was I donating old clothes because they were too small for me. I was donating because they were too big.
yeah, I went through a lot of clothes.
But
I
that
had
tells
actually
you
had,
that you were on, like you're not saying, "Oh, I better keep this in case I gain my weight back." Right? A lot of people do that. You go, "I better keep this just in case the holidays come and I gain my weight back." You were saying
yeah.
like, "I'm done. I'm moving down. I'm moving," and like you had a mindset that was keeping you moving forward.
Well, I did actually keep sort of a few that were sort of one or two sizes too big for me.
Mhm.
Like I wasn't sort of that firm about it, but I was just losing so much, and so many sizes were just dropping so dramatically. Like my biggest button shirt I had, I think was a 6XL, for example, and um and my biggest
And you're 5'9",
waisted.
so people know you're about 5'9" too,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I'm about 5'9", and my biggest waisted dress pants were like 132 centimeters. I couldn't tell you what that is in inches, but it's a lot. And for people who carry weight as well, I'll just add a little something here. When you're of a sufficient size, you've got this awkward bulge of the belly, and you're sort of in two minds as to how to wear the pants. Do you wear them a little high or a little low? And I would wear them low, so the belly would sort of hang over the pants. But if I was to get a true waist circumference, I never actually did, but my true waist circumference might have been, um,
Yeah, a lot more.
a lot
Yeah, you
more.
you 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 even talked about that too of being on the like you'd have to lay on a table like for pregnant women so because so your stomach could be through that when they were doing physical therapy on you.
Yeah. I got a bit of massage at one point because I'm dealing with chronic chest pain. And so some chest massage while lying on my back was fine. And then one day they sort of said, well, let's see what happens if we flip you over. And it was just too uncomfortable. I hadn't been able to sleep on my stomach for years because it was just too big. It just got in the way. I was never comfortable with it. And so they wheel in this bed with a strategically placed hole in the middle of it. And I'm thinking, oh, this is genius. Do you do a lot of work with overweight types? And the lady said, well, we do a bit of work with pregnant women and we usually break this out for them. And I'm just thinking, oh, the shame, the
Yeah,
shame.
yeah.
It actually felt quite comfortable, I will admit. But at the time I was just thinking, oh, the shame. This is just awful.
Yeah, so with all this, you start having success, and it sounds like for a long time you were still self-conscious, even though, and the other thing is that you raised the point I think is very valid, is that you had so many people rooting for you along the way. You were sharing your journey, and then all of a sudden you started losing a weight where you were thinner than the people who were rooting for you, and then like you were no longer the underdog, and now you were a threat to them.
Yeah, I mean, I have friends and colleagues at work and that sort of thing, and every now and then, if I was coming over for a meeting to a different office where people hadn't seen me for a while, they would notice a difference and they think, oh wow, you look great. Although I'm still, quite comfortably larger than a lot of these people, so there was an element of that and just being supportive. But I did notice that as I sort of got to a point where I was becoming smaller than a lot of these people, they weren't so openly complimentary anymore. It was like I was sort of beginning to undermine their own state of health, if you like. But I can understand that, and I would just sort of take that day by day as it comes. Just to I remember the one of my colleagues, she was away on maternity leave for a while, so she hadn't seen me for quite some time, and she comes back after this extended period away, and I've lost most of my weight by then, and she says, "Oh, Brendan, you look amazing," and I remember thinking at the time, I think that's possibly the first time that anyone has actually complimented me for my appearance. I've been described as handsome or whatever, that the usual sort of platitudes that people might offer without it really necessarily meaning anything. But to actually be complimented in a genuine sense, like people are recognizing that you've made this fundamental change and that you look amazing, or whatever word that you want to use, for me that was just gold dust to my brain, that to that point was basically bankrupt of any positive thoughts regarding my self image. Like it's one thing to see the number on the scales dropping, and it's one thing to potentially recognize something in the mirror maybe loosening up. It's one thing to maybe feel like you're fitting clothes a little bit better, but for other people to notice that you're making a difference, that's when and at an extra level, that what you're doing is real. It is tangible. This is happening. This is for the best. This is really making a difference.
Did it ever bother you when people brought it up or said, "Oh my gosh, you used to look terrible. You look great now." Did it ever, did that ever annoy you, or did you always enjoy that people complimented you? Because I've heard different things from different people.
Yeah, it didn't really bother me too much either way. I mean, it was never really spoken of before I'd started losing weight. Back when I was at my heaviest, I remember some people saying to me after I'd lost the weight that they remember how I used to be, and they would sort of wonder what to say, but decide not to say anything. That it would just be easier to avoid the subject, and
Mhm.
and I would actually have said to them at that point that, well, you were probably right. At that time, I was just so down and out emotionally as well as physically that I really wouldn't have been in any sort of mood to hear what anybody would have suggested. I would have just expected it to have been all of the same things that I'd heard for years, and just to brush it off, thinking, no, just leave me alone. That's not going to work. So there were people who were concerned. They tended to not necessarily express that concern at that time. But once the changes started happening, people started recognizing it and acknowledging it freely. Like, I'm not seeking these things; these are people seeking me to tell me that, hey, you're looking better, you're doing really well. Keep up the good work, and that meant so much, considering my lifelong history of people putting me down for my appearance. And now here I am for the first time in a position where um, all of a sudden they're talking me up. So yeah, it was all good for
Yeah,
my
you had a
part.
lot of encouragement, and Tro and I talk about that too, the importance of community, having people around you, encouraging you, stepping you when things get hard. But and it sounds like you had that mindset, like I'm doing this, like nothing was going to knock you off that path.
Well, certainly for as long as things continued to work, right? Like this whole
Yeah.
idea for me of trying out this low carb was as an experiment. So I had to sort of design a whole new eating plan for myself. I didn't have any professional help at all with what I'd done beyond that initial sort of prod from the gym manager who says, right, try this low carb thing, and away I went, and I did it all by myself for about 10 months before I went back to the gym to actually pay the man because at the first meeting, I was pretty distressed, and he recognised that and he said, "Look, I'm so sure that this will be the thing for you that I won't even charge you for this first appointment. And if it works as I expect it will, then you can come back and pay me later. If it doesn't, then that's fine. No harm done either way, right? But if it does, then come back and pay me later." So I went back to him 10 months later to pay the man. And by that time, I'd lost 40 odd kilos, however many pounds that is, 90 odd pounds, and he was just absolutely blown away. Not even he expected that much of a difference over that relatively short period of time.
Yeah, and he said he was
And
proud of you and very encouraging too, it sounds like.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I'm pleased to say that in the years since, it's taken me a while longer to sort of get around to this point. But last year, I did actually finally sign up to a membership at the gym, which is a bit of an advance on what I'd written about exercise in the book. I remember writing at
Yeah,
the
you
point.
like it was like torture. You didn't like it wasn't your thing, right?
Yeah, yeah. I felt like, the gym environment and exercise in general really still wasn't my thing. All I'd really been doing physically was just walking to work and back every day. It really seemed to be the change in the food, the change in the diet that was doing it for me. But with the further passing of time and as I sort of settle into this maintenance routine, I'm sort of trying to figure out ways in which I can incorporate other forms of exercise into my life. I hear about the benefits of strength and resistance training and so on, which I'd never really done before in my life. And that's the sort of thing that realistically I can only ever expect to achieve, with this idea of sort of true habit forming, getting out of the house and going to the gym and getting it done, that sort of thing. And so that's what I started doing for the first time last year, about 18 months ago. Um, and that's been a really interesting experience of its own. It's at the same gym, the same guy. He's still there. I asked him at one point, was I your longest ever cell job from the time of the first
Yeah,
appointment that I
yeah.
made with him back in 2015 to finally actually getting a membership with him in 2023? And he's like, yeah, by a country
eight
mile.
years.
It
Eight
took
years and
8 years.
a lot of weight later.
Yeah,
Yeah.
8 years and a lot of weight later to finally come around to going to the gym. But it's for different reasons now, right? Like it's at the time I'd sort of thought, well, maybe this exercise thing is what I need to do to lose weight. And now it's just about being the best version of myself physically that I can be. It's about improving the body comp as well as helping to maintain the weight. So that is a part of my routine now, since having written what I'd written about exercise in the book.
Yeah, I mean, your whole journey is just amazing, And then, I think this is such an important statement you made too. It says, when you were having this success, it said everyone wanted to know my secret to weight loss until I actually shared it with them.
Yeah, people who I didn't necessarily deal with on a regular basis, like people outside of work and that sort of thing, sort of the wider circle of colleagues and acquaintances and so on. I wouldn't see those people quite so frequently, and so they'd see me, for the first time in a while, and they would be the ones that would tend to ask. And there were quite a lot of those people, and I found that they tended to fall into four different brackets of people, if you like. Um, the first group of people would be happy for me regardless, right? They don't really care about what I did to lose weight. They're just happy that I lost the weight, that I have achieved it. Um, there will be another set of people who I tell them, okay, well, I lost it on this low carb thing. And this will be something that they might have heard of in the past and thought, okay, well, that actually sounds kind of interesting. But like me, they've been scared away by the usual gang of experts saying no, 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 don't do it. And so they find it quite reassuring to know someone personally who has actually made it work for them. It sort of gives them pause for thought and, oh, maybe this is something I should reconsider.
Gives hope.
Um, yeah,
Hope.
yeah, a bit of that. Then you've got the third cohort of people who they think, oh, low carb, that means I've got to go without insert favorite food of choice here. I couldn't live without my bread or my pizza or my pasta. Um, well, I love those things too, and I still miss them. But it turns out that, what I've learned is that they just don't love me. I can have, and I've tried it. Some people have since asked me, when are you going to start eating normal again now that you've lost the weight? And the only way to silence these people is to actually try it. So I start, eating a bit more bread or whatever just to see what happens. And straight away, the weight comes back, the blood work goes backwards, and it's just like, well, no, that's those things can no longer be a part of my life, no matter how much I might want them to be. This is a one-way relationship. I love them, they don't love me. So, you just got to part with them and be done with it. So you've got people who sort of in that third cohort that say, oh, I could never do that because it would mean going without these things. And that may be a sign of perhaps an element of food addiction in there, potentially, or something. I'm not sure. And then
Yeah,
you
and
have
emotional. There's a huge emotional component to food, right? Because we
oh
associate
yeah,
pizza with fun
eating for
times and
pleasure.
donuts for, winning the baseball game or whatever it is, or cricket game in your case. So yeah, there's so much emotional attachments. It's
Yeah.
not just nutrition anymore.
And the fourth are the group of people who really seem quite taken aback by the idea, almost offended, if you like, that I'd done it this way because they're just so convinced in their mind um, that low carb, can't possibly work, and that I've somehow lost weight wrong, or I've got healthy wrong, or despite my results, the diet is still dangerous and is somehow going to kill me. Perhaps forgetting that at one point I practically had one foot in the grave. And, low carb has so completely changed my life by every measure that's important, not just physically, but emotionally. It's brought me out of the woodwork. I had a friend of mine once describe me as a polite shell of a person, which I thought was an interesting pairing of words. Um, but that the shell obviously refers to the what I used to carry, and I'm now free of that shell, if you like, and free to just sort of explore what life can offer for me, in all sorts of dimensions. Like, there's so many things that I've been able to do in life now, um, since having lost the weight, that I could never have dreamed of doing before. Traveling long haul, for example, to go to conferences and meet people such as yourself was just never going to be an option for me before I'd lost the weight. So yeah,
Well,
it's
and
it's a pretty big deal.
the irony too is that you shared a story when you were coming to the U.S. and a lady looked at you and said, "Oh, thank God you're not overweight because I was going to be smashed the whole ride."
Yeah, that was my first trip to the US in 2016. So I'm checking in at LAX and board the plane, and this family sort of sitting in the middle section of the jumbo jet, and there's one space on the end, the aisle seat. I was pleased to get the aisle seat. You love an aisle seat on the long haul flights. And she says, "Oh, I'm so glad that you're not this big horrible fat guy." And I just sort of sat down and laughed, and I thought, that's actually really funny, and I couldn't help but sort of tell her the story. Once upon a time, not so long ago, I was exactly as you had described. So you're welcome, basically.
Yeah, your hard work and it all paid off, and but you talk about that, like seeing other people on the plane and how hard it is to get into the seats and the seatbelt extenders. You're like on the verge of it, but you didn't have to. But it's a hard thing, and that's one of the things that really helps motivate some people to say, I gotta get better. I can't be keep doing this. And so the other thing I really appreciate in your book, and I was actually really surprised, is you did an excellent job of going through timelines of all these different lawsuits that were happening with all these leaders, like Professor Noakes, who his book basically saved your life. That really the gym guy saved your life by pointing you in that direction.
Mm,
Maybe someone else would have later, but he points you in the direction. Then you look at Professor Noakes. Then Professor Noakes goes through the trial. Karen Zinn, you talk about her, Dr. Boudoir Roy, and all these people that were getting medical boards coming after him. And Tro and I, we were looking at all this because we had just started Low Carb MD podcast, and we're saying, I wonder how these trials are going to go. We didn't have a verdict yet, but it's very dangerous. And you're looking at these people who basically saved your life, like by giving you this recommendation, and they're getting attacked by the medical boards and the nutrition boards and the dietitians. And yeah, it's so hard to see that.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't actually aware of any of that at all when I first started with low carb. So I'm listening to Prof Noakes and sort of absorbing what he's sort of suggesting with regard to, how to adapt to a low carb diet and all the evidence for it, etc. I had no idea about the trial and the background tribulations that were going on at the same time as I was sort of undergoing my own journey. But yeah, I sort of felt when putting the book together, like the story part of it sort of constitutes maybe three-quarters or so of the book. And that came together fairly easy, fairly naturally. Like I said before, I had so much that I just felt I needed to get off my chest. And so it began with the journal. The journal sort of began to morph into the book of sorts. And I realized sort of about 2019, early 2020 at that point, well, I've written the story. And from a reader's perspective, they might think, okay, well, good for him. He's changed his life and lost all this weight and has gotten healthy, etc. That's great. But how do I know from a reader's perspective how transferable, how applicable his experience might be, or various aspects of his experience might be to me as the reader? And when I thought about that, I thought, oh no, I'm going to have to do some research. I'm going to have to really put some effort in to put an ending together for this book. That's so that as a whole, it's more than just my story. It's a case of here's my story, and here is the evidence to support it. And as someone with no real academic background at all, I suppose I had the potential academically. I did well at school, but my weight sort of led me to a point where I decided, well, it's not really worth my going to university because chances are I'll be dead before I pay it off anyway, sort of thing. So I never really pushed myself in that regard before. So it was quite an interesting exercise, but quite a fulfilling one. I learned a lot about, the various studies that are out there, the various challenges that various proponents have faced in recent years. Understanding how, one of the key things that really opened my eyes while putting the ending of this book together was understanding how it is that you and I are both aware of the various studies, the body of evidence out there that supports low carb as a viable option for the treatment of any given metabolic health issues. How is it that we are aware of these studies, yet the existence of these studies is not necessarily reflected in our dietary policy? So you have a bit of a discrepancy going on there, and I sort of think about this with my IT brain. How is it that when you take these inputs in the form of evidence and you process them and synthesize them and produce evidence reviews and things that form the basis for policy, how is it that the policy that results, the output of the other end, does not seemingly necessarily reflect all of the elements of the input that you're feeding into that process in the first place? And so I learned a lot about how evidence reviews are put together that conclude things like, oh, there's no evidence that low carb works for weight loss, et cetera, et cetera. Well, of course, it's easy to come to that conclusion when your review is constructed in such a way that serves to ensure that pretty much all of that evidence that you and I know is out there just happens to be excluded from consideration, or it just, air quotes, doesn't count for
Yeah, and
whatever
then
technical reason that they might invent.
you look at the ties that all these people have that are on these boards that are making the decision who their other boards they're on that happen to be big food companies and soda companies and things like that. And you go, okay. So it's hard, and there's so much propaganda and there's so much that people are up against. And you say, gosh, if it's helping people, like let them try it. Like in your case, if you tried it and didn't work, you go on to the next thing. It's no biggie, right? So it's a really hard thing that there's so much bias. So if I talk about metabolic health, people are all in. If I say low carb or keto, they're like, that's crazy, right? Without data, because they heard it on, Time Magazine said it, or they heard on The View or whatever it is. So it's hard because there's a lot of people who just, there's either an agenda or they're just not educated. And most doctors just don't have time, to educate themselves and to learn. And if I'm your doctor, and that's what happened with me. My first patient, that's how I got in touch with Jason Fung. My first patient came and lost 40 pounds. I'm like, what did you do? Like I'm telling you, I've had patients that have lost, 80 pounds. They go back to their primary because I'm just consulting for the metabolic issues. And the doctor doesn't say a word about it. Not like, what
Yeah.
are you doing? Holy cow. Or if they tell him, I go, don't tell them you're doing keto. Don't say that. Just say you're doing a modified Mediterranean. They go, you're a genius. What do you eat? I eat salmon. Well, that's keto too, right? Like all these things that, yeah, obviously you're healthy, your lab numbers got better, everything you did. And then the doctor's like, oh my gosh, you're going to die. After you
Yeah,
tell them.
my own doctor was. I mean, he's great, but he was a little bit concerned at first. He sort of wasn't too familiar with it, but sort of thought, okay, well, if this is something that, I mean, I was clearly invested in it myself. I thought, right, here's my experiment. This is what I'm going to do, and I was sort of checking in with the doctor. He wasn't necessarily actively for or against it either way. He was just like, okay, well, let's monitor things and see how you go. My first round of blood testing while I was actively losing weight, certainly compared to what my blood work looked like before I was losing weight, was generally an improvement across the board. My trigs had come down, my HDL had
HDL.
gone up, but so had my LDL. And he looks at that and thinks, oh, are we doing the right thing here? But at the same time, all these other markers, the trigs, the HDL, the blood sugar and the blood pressure, and most importantly for me, the number on the scales, the visible weight that I'm carrying. He can see it for himself as well, that I am actively losing a meaningful amount of weight for the first time in my life. It's all of these markers against this one potential marker, the LDL. And he just sort of decided, well, majority rule, let's just
Yeah.
keep monitoring it. And in the end, it turned out that my LDL has since come back down, and that for me, the elevation was perhaps only really there as a temporary thing while I was actually actively losing the weight, and sort of gone back
Yeah,
to where it was.
that's well known. You could go on a vegan diet, you could go on whatever diet, you could fast, your LDL goes up. So it's the weight loss. When you lose weight, what's happening? Your fat's not stored in your fat cells anymore. You kick it out into the circulation, right? So the reason your LDL went up and down and all these things is when you're really overweight and your visceral fat is very full, it starts leaking out LDL out of the fat cells because it's this fat cells can't take it anymore. They're trying to leak it to make space for the next thing you're going to eat.
Mm.
So once you're weight neutral, or if you're gaining weight, your LDL drops all the time. So it's not a good thing. It's just what it is. It's physiologic. And that's why we get so caught up on one number and not look at the whole picture of metabolic health. And that's why your story is so powerful and so important. And, it's just amazing what your mindset, what you went through. And I think when you started writing the book, was it, stressful for you? Was it like overwhelming, or did you say I'm just jotting stuff down and start like what was the process like?
So the process, I guess, I sort of journaled for maybe 2 or so years before the idea of a book was first put to me, and at that time I sort of thought, well, really? I mean, a book sounds like an awful lot of effort. Books are for And besides, books are for experts, people who know things, people who have qualifications that demonstrate that they know things. So your doctors, your professors, your scientists, your journalists, and I am none of those things. I didn't have a degree at the time. I'd never been to university. What good would a story like mine have for the wider world? And that sort of was eventually overridden by the fact, well, maybe it would just be of benefit to myself to just get it off my chest. The journaling had been so beneficial for me those first couple of years already. Let's just keep journaling, but with the idea of maybe a book at some point in the future, once I've arrived at a certain point in time with my story, and just sort of see what happens. And so it morphed kind of gradually. And I got to a point where sort of by 2019, I'm writing sort of in two different streams simultaneously. There's the raw material, if you like, of the journal. And then there's also the act of me writing more formally, if you like, in book form. So the journal became the basis for the book, and the book was essentially finished by end of 2020, early 2021. Um, but I've never stopped journaling. So I've been journaling now for, I guess, 8.5 years. It was early 2016. Here we are into 2024. So yeah, 8.5 years I've been journaling, and I continue to derive benefit from it. What I journal about now, of course, is not so much about the weight loss because I've sort of been there, done that, but it's just about other broader things in life. Like what purpose is the gym serving me really? What can I do about sources of stress in my life, be it about work or anything else? How do I, what do I do with questions around finances, or just whatever is on my mind. The scope of my journal now, just a personal private thing, is I'll write about anything that's coming to mind where I feel like I could do with having a conversation about it. But I'm just content to have that conversation with myself, in effect, in the form of that journaling. That's one thing that I'm really, really grateful to have discovered. I would never have expected when I was younger to be a writer in whatever sense. But the journaling is still ongoing. I have the book. I had to do a bit of writing for the degree that I now have since achieved. I graduated last year with a Bachelor of IT,
Congrats,
and I
man.
have. Thank you. And one of the benefits of that degree, not only is it good for me professionally as a career, obviously, with the extra accreditation that offers, but it also potentially ticks a very important personal box for me in my future. In that having an undergraduate degree potentially opens the doors for some postgraduate study at some point in the future, which is something I've been mulling over for a while. And whenever I've been talking to people about it, it's been a case of, well, you should get the undergraduate degree first. So I've this is sort
Yeah,
of
well, a
my next
stepping
long,
stone. Yeah, it's
yeah,
a
yeah,
stepping stone. There
another
you go.
another
Look at
stepping
that.
stone in my next sort of long term life project, if you like. I'm interested to see just how far I can get in the postgraduate space. And I suppose I can offer you a little bit of breaking news. I don't think I've ever shared this publicly with anyone before, not yet anyway. But I have recently been accepted to AUT in Auckland for a postgraduate study program there, looking at public health. So a PG cert in,
Wow.
in public health is what I'm going to be looking for there. And again, that's another stepping stone. Like I have ideas for a research project that I would like to do in the future, just sort of touching on the point we'd mentioned earlier around translating evidence into policy, that sort of thing. And it feels like public health would be a good fit for that. So I have an idea for a research project that would sort of explore that a little bit more formally. So there'll be a bit more writing, but perhaps more of an academic slant to it at that point. And who knows? Maybe I'll have a meaningful postgrad qualification to show for it at the end one day. I mean, this is a medium to long term thing, but the journey gets underway in 2025 at AUT with
Amazing.
the postgrad
Yeah.
program there. So we'll see how that goes.
And you'll have an impact there. And so yeah, I'll tell you, I was blown away just looking at your book and then looking at all the footnotes. You footnoted everything. It's like, when you're doing a personal memoir or something, you just go, this is the story, but you footnoted, you had sources. And yeah, it's very impressive, that's important for people to be able to look. And you also threw in recipes. You did so much that will help someone who's like starting, because I would ask you, like, what advice would you give to someone who's struggling back where you started from? Like, what would you tell them right now as a word of advice or encouragement?
So there were three rules, if you like, that I had sort of set for myself when I was getting underway with my low carb journey. The first of which was that I would consciously choose to never ever go hungry, which was such an about face for any and all previous attempts to lose weight, that you always had to sort of consciously restrict and starve yourself to a point where it's just really unpleasant. And I decided, no, I'm going to eat till I'm satisfied, to not stuff myself, but just eat when I'm hungry, don't when I'm not, ignore the clock, just listen to your body and pay attention to that. That was the first rule. The second rule was when it comes to low carb, I mean, for me, I took it very literally. I picked a number on the label, no more than 10 gram of carbs per 100 grams, according to the label. Eventually, I lowered that down to 5 once I had discovered enough sort of variety for myself that I could get away with going that low. And the third rule was to keep track of things, to track the body weight and the journal, I suppose, as a secondary thing at first, but it sort of came to dominate down the track once the weight had been lost. It's hard to fix something if you're not tracking it. So keep a record of everything that you're doing and eating to the extent that you're comfortable doing. Like I never kept a food diary as such. But I had developed a routine of my own anyway. Perhaps a proxy for a food diary that I found useful was the supermarket shopping list. So once you've figured out, okay, what things do I need to be shopping for and not, well, you're obviously going to write down a shopping list for that. And I would keep my shopping lists. I have a pile of little bits of note paper with months worth of of supermarket shopping lists that I can go back to in case of, or maybe I've gone off something for whatever reason, and I can just sort of go backwards in time for further food ideas, or perhaps for other reasons that it's actually turned out that these things aren't so good for me, so that's why I don't have those things anymore. So those were the three things that I found really useful to get started. If there was anything that I could change about the way I had done it, not so much a regret necessarily, because it turned out for the best for me in the end, but the fact that I essentially did it by myself with very little support along the way, I would say that it would be that much more useful to people who are really struggling to get that professional support in the form of a dietitian or a doctor, a nutritionist, whoever, some sort of health professional who is prepared to support you on your journey. And if that's someone other than your usual person, like if they're not particularly supportive of what it is you're doing, but you're keen to give this a shot and you're keen to give it every chance of success, then go get a second opinion, go get a third opinion, find someone who's going to support what it is that you want to do in order to get better. That would be the only thing I would potentially have changed about my own journey. But I'm very, very fortunate that it turned out so wonderfully well for me in the end anyway. But there's no guarantee that people just sort of diving in by themselves will necessarily always have that same level of success.
Yeah, you need accountability. You need someone to help get you back on track when you go off. Like you're an unusual case that way of staying so on track, getting that mindset. It's hard because a lot of people and I never heard you say that like that it was a huge thing for you to give up certain foods like pizza, and like it was a really an emotion. You go, look, this is what I'm doing, and I can't have this, I can't have this, I can't have that. That what you can have, and focusing on that, because if you focus on how long the journey is and how hard it is, you just give up. Like at the beginning, I could see when you have, 100 and some odd pounds to lose, it's like, oh gosh, that's a long journey. But if you go 1 pound at a time, one step at a time, and your progress was so amazing.
Exactly. You break it down 1 month at a time, 1 week at a time, 1 day at a time, one meal at a time. My meal routine is pretty regimented. I have certain dinners for each night of the week, and people might think, oh, that sounds a bit boring. And maybe it is, but the fact of the matter is, these are the meals that I have arrived at over time that I have established work most effectively for me. They satiate me, they are helpful in helping to keep the weight off. And the other angle to it is that if I have this set meal plan, I don't really have to spend any time agonizing over what it is I'm going to have for dinner tonight because it's already
Mm.
worked out. Okay, well it's Saturday, so today is such and such a night, or whatever it is. So it takes that whole thinking and wondering and worrying just completely out of the equation as well, which I personally found quite useful.
So, Brendan, where do you think you'd be right now? Where would your life be if you didn't make those changes?
I would say that there's a very good chance that if I had not taken up low carb in 2015 as I did, there's a very good chance that I would not still be here today to be having this conversation. Um, I was over 300 pounds at my heaviest. Emotionally, I was down and out, not just because of my weight, but I was just a couple of years post earthquake. I was in Christchurch for the Christchurch earthquakes of 2010
Yeah.
and 2011. Very, very traumatic experience in its own right. So I'm down and out because of that. I'm down and out physically for more obvious reasons.
You're having
Um,
anxiety, you're having chest pain, you're having all these other things going on. Yeah.
Yeah, I could tell that I was sort of circling the drain. Like I'm already, medicating for chest pain in my mid 30s. I sort of got the sense that my body was really just sort of struggling to cope with itself in that state, and that any day now the worst could happen, and that will be it. And I never wanted that to happen. Like I've never felt any differently about life. I have always wanted to live, but I was so down and out at one point that I was thinking that this is just so out of my control. There's nothing I can do. Um, something's going to happen any day now, and that'll be it. I have very little doubt in my mind that if that low carb had changed, if not saved, um, my life.
Wow. Wow. And now the gym owner's making money off you finally, so that's good.
Good
Yeah.
for
So
him.
it's a good ending for him too, a good ending for you. And he gave you great advice at the beginning. And he wasn't just there to take your money. If he would have just taken your money at the beginning, you wouldn't be there now, right? You probably
Yeah.
wouldn't have lasted in the gym. You would have got burned out and all those kind of things. You kind of know where the story goes, and it's amazing. So I commend you for your accomplishment and for taking the time to write a book to help other people and to get them on the right track. So I have to ask you, what's life's best medicine for you since you're on this podcast? Like, where did you go when you're at the bottom? What motivated you, kept you going? Where do you go now when you have a hard, bad day? You know, where do you find your joy? Whatever if you go, look, I'm on my deathbed. Here's what matters, guys.
Mm. I would say, gee, this is a good question. There's a certain balance to strike, I think, between courage and comfort, I suppose. In the bad old days for me, when I was overweight, I was just about making my life as comfortable as I possibly could, because it was, for the most part, quite uncomfortable in many respects. So the comfort sort of side of things really sort of came to dominate. And I guess what having lost the weight through low carb has allowed me to do is be a bit more courageous and to step out in the world, take some risks, go outside and have face to face conversations, touch some grass, meet people, all of those things that in the past I would never have felt comfortable doing, would have actively sought to avoid um, wherever possible. The idea of my having gone to the US again, that's a big trip for someone like me based in New Zealand, to have made that trip three times now, 2016, 2020, and most recently earlier this year in San Diego. Um, that's a big thing, which for me requires a lot of courage. I made the trip and organized it and paid for it all, etc., by myself. And now that I'm back home, I'm kind of back in comfort mode for a little while, just allowing the batteries to recharge and the body to just sort of settle back into the routine. I wasn't gymming for a couple of weeks while I was away, so just finding my happy place again at home and just sort of settling back down, but at the same time building towards the next sort of moment of courage, if you like, which for me will probably be this study that I'm going to be kicking off with next year. So balancing, I guess, the need for taking active steps, taking a few risks, and making the most out of life, having that courage to pursue that which about which you feel the most passionate, while at the same time not burning yourself out over it, giving yourself moments in between those exciting times to recharge the batteries and take stock and reassess, and just sort of take it in swings and roundabouts, as you work your way through life, I suppose.
Yeah, enjoy the journey. It sounds like you enjoyed the journey. You took your strides. You did one thing at a time. You're not being impatient because impatience is the enemy. I talked about that in San Diego. Like, don't be impatient. So let me take it a time. You gain a pound here, it goes down here. Okay, there's fluid. You even talk about fluid shifts from morning to night and all these other things. So you did such a great job of capturing all this stuff. And if people want to track you down, how do they find you? On
So
social
the
media?
Yeah, so my website is thefatgingernerd.com. These links to various places about where you can buy the book. There's a bit of a blog there, which isn't necessarily all that active, but there's a few examples at least, so people can sort of try before you buy. If you like the reading style, then try the blog out first. On social media, there's a Facebook page, The Fat Ginger Nerd, and on X, on just at Fat Ginger Nerd. There was no room for the, but never mind. And I have a YouTube channel as well. Not that there's very much there, but a few presentations of my own that I've made at a few conferences in the past, podcast clips and those sorts of things there as well. Again, that's just The Fat Ginger Nerd on YouTube.
Awesome. So everyone listening, again, be kind to yourself, be kind to others. If someone's struggling, be kind to them, help them, encourage them, be like the gym guy who said, look, here's the way you got to go. I'm not just going to take your money. And so I think there's so much in this book, in this story, in this podcast that you could just help and listen. I'm so excited for people to listen to it, and especially for that person who's hopeless, that's given up on everything, and everyone says it's crazy, don't do it, and you go, okay, let me just give it a shot. Let me just see what happens for me, and giving up the processed food and just getting the activity and getting those steps in. So I would highly recommend go get Brendan's book. Support him in that. Like it takes this thing is like 300 pages and it has so much good information in there, and recipes that can get you through. If you hate avocados, he figured out a way to get past that thing, and the textures or whatever it might be. And so the Fat Ginger Nerd, you can get it at Amazon or go to his website and support him in what he's doing so we can get him back out to the United States and give some talks and things like that, because it's not cheap to come from New Zealand. So I'm glad you gave up your Saturday morning to join us. So thank you so much. It was such a pleasure and so encouraging, and there's so much wisdom, and I hope all my patients listen to your story because it's such a inspiring, and just the truth and the grittiness of growing up, struggling, getting teased and all that, and coming out to be such a great guy, and so kind, and approaching everyone at the conference and telling your story and helping people. It's pretty amazing. So cheers to you and thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Brian. It's kind of the hope for me going forward. I feel like I've accomplished as much as I possibly can with low carb at a personal level to this point, and so the aim now is just to, like you say, pay it forward. And if the book can do that for people out there, then so much the better. But look, thank you again for the opportunity today. I've really enjoyed it. So cheers.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode. We greatly appreciate your support. We would greatly appreciate a positive thumbs up on all of the platforms like iTunes and Spotify or wherever you're listening. And we just thank you for our Patreon supporters. We greatly appreciate your help in getting this message out. We think there's a lot of important information. And hopefully this helps you. Have a great day, and thank you for listening, and thank you for your support.